I think we sometimes forget why we became a musician. We forget why we became a music educator. We forget the little things that we do. Maybe the concert doesn't sound like the Marine Band, but maybe for those children, it's the most profound thing that ever happened. And maybe the kids had such a great experience. We know darn well, and we don't think about this. What really matters in live performance isn't how it sounds. How does it feel? How does it feel to play One Life Beautiful by Julie Giroux? What happened to you during the course of this composition and this performance that affect the way you are as a human being, as a musician? And if it's good, then we win.
Welcome to Director's Circle, a podcast featuring insight from music educators and school leaders discussing their philosophies on the administrative leadership of a comprehensive music program. I'm Doug Conrad, and today's guest is Dr. Stephen Gage from Youngstown, Ohio. Let's begin. Hello, what's up everybody? It's almost the end of marching band season, and I felt like doing a little song because, like most of you, we're getting a lot more free time at the end of the day to do more projects, so many activities, and all that kind of cool stuff. So whether you're ending up the competition season, football season, or anything of the like, I hope you're doing well and are gearing up for your winter holiday season. It's right around the corner. It doesn't feel like it though, right? So anyway, welcome to Director's Circle. I'm Doug Conrad. Thank you so much for tuning in. And before we begin, I would like to take a moment, and if you are new to the podcast, encouraging you to head on over to our social media accounts, whether it be on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or even on different media like Spotify, iTunes, or Google Play Music, and subscribing to the show. Every new subscribe, every new like, or even every new review on the iTunes store, it really means a lot in helping us reach new audience members. So, with today's guest, today we have the pleasure of having Dr. Stephen Gage on the show. And when I was thinking of how I was going to introduce Dr. Gage, I really had to think about what this interview meant to me. And it's one of the most special ones I've had, in that whenever I was researching my questions that I was going to discuss with Dr. Gage, one of his previous students that I know had mentioned to me that he is the most student-centered educator that he has ever met. And having that in mind, I was prepared to discuss that kind of thing during our interview. But even with being student-centered, it's not just something that we can talk about, it's something that you feel. And I can honestly say that this interview was very special to me as the interviewer, in that throughout my entire discussion with Dr. Gage, I really felt a connection with him, even though we were discussing things over Skype several hundred miles apart over the country. And with his ability to connect with human beings, find common ground, make meaningful and special moments, and inspire people through the medium of music is really something that is special about this human being. And he is a very incredible man and a wonderful educator, and I'm very excited to have him on. So now, to tell you a little bit more about Dr. Gage. Dr. Stephen Gage has served as the professor of conducting and also as director of bands and orchestras at Youngstown State University's Dana School of Music since 1993. Dr. Gage leads the Masters in Instrumental Conducting program and has also been the YSU Dana School of Music recruiting coordinator for his entire residency on the faculty. Prior to his time at YSU, Gage has also held teaching positions at several other institutions, including being the Director of Bands and Orchestra at Emporia State University, and also as the Director of Bands at Auburn High School in Auburn, New York. Dr. Gage, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good afternoon, Doug. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. And first, to start off a little bit, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and your professional background?
Certainly. I grew up in upstate New York, Western New York, actually, and I went to SUNY Fredonia, and I got a bachelor's of music education there and a performer's certificate in percussion. Then I went out and got a job in a rural school district, which happened to be the neighboring district to my high school. I'm pretty sure I got the job because my great uncle had been on the school board Up to that point, it didn't seem that any administrator was willing to hire a percussionist to be their band director. And I literally had one guy actually say that to me in an interview. It was a wonderful 2-year journey, but I knew that there were other things in my life that I wished to do. So I went to Eastman and I got a master's degree there. And then I taught for 9 years in central New York, in Auburn, New York, which is a town that sits on the north end of Cayuga Lake. And the other end of that lake, of course, is Ithaca, which is probably a more familiar city, especially to musicians. And those were extraordinary years for me, Doug. Frankly, I know for a fact that at least my psyche, the way that I tick, if I hadn't had those years, I'm not so sure I would be comfortable at all doing what I do today. Then after that, I met Gary Smith and Jim Keene at the University of Illinois. After spending 2 or 3 days there, I fell in love with the University of Illinois, and I went there to do a doctoral residency. And I told them that I would like to go back out and work as soon as possible. They helped me do that. I took a position at Emporia State University in Kansas, where I was the director of bands and percussion teacher. I did that for 3 years. At that juncture, I had a phone call from one of my former Auburn High School students, who was currently, at that time, was a trombone major here at Youngstown State University. He said Les Hicken had just taken a job back home in South Carolina at Furman, and was I interested in talking to Youngstown about the position? And my wife and I thought about it, and we decided that we would come. They put us up in this beautiful kind of bed and breakfast inn with a canopy bed in the front of a Victorian style inn, and made it very, very attractive. After a lot of contemplation, we took the position. We moved here in 1993, and we've raised 2 children here. My son from my first marriage ended up moving here as well, and we've been here for 27 years.
That's quite a remarkable story. So to talk a little bit now about your program at Youngstown State University, could you talk about what ensembles you oversee and the numbers of students in each of those ensembles?
Of course, I've done everything here. When I first came, Doug, I was the marching band director. At that juncture, Jim Tressel, who's now our president, was our head football coach. He was winning football games like crazy. I jumped on the bandwagon and got him over 200 students in the marching band. That really helped the music school grow. By the end of the century, 1999, we had so many students in our music school. I couldn't find any music school on the planet that had just one band director. I went to the administration and on my knees to some extent and asked them to augment our program by adding a director, which they fortunately did. And so I moved into more like the position I have now, where I conduct the Wind Ensemble. I've done music education classes. We started a graduate conducting program at that point at the end of the 90s, and that has continued through to today. And so currently I conduct the Wind Ensemble and chamber winds. I conduct the Symphony Orchestra and have done that since 2014. And I also conduct the orchestras, about 50 to 60 players, the wind ensembles, right around 50 players. I call it a one-bus band, so that we can tour on one bus. And then I also conduct the Youngstown Symphony Youth Orchestra, which is about 95 musicians of this region, both Western Pennsylvania and Northeast Ohio. And in 2010, I became the primary conductor of the Packard Concert Band, which is a professional band in Warren, Ohio. So needless to say, I have 4 ensembles for which I am ultimately responsible for selection of repertoire, rehearsing, and learning all those tunes.
Yeah, that's certainly a wide gamut of ensembles, and it's unique that I completely forgot, but with Jim Tressel, obviously everyone knows his name nationally, with a lot of his work at Ohio State previously, with his championship years also, too, at Youngstown as a coach, but I forgot that he is now the university president and in his administrative role. So to kind of touch on that, as that's a really unique thing, to work, and especially when you first started as a marching band director with him as a coach, but even now as the lead administrator for a university. What's that like working with somebody who has a very national, well-known prominence in that field? Is there anything you had a unique connection with being the marching band director or the band director at the time? Does that kind of delve into a relationship, or just what's that like in general?
Well, it's Jim Tressel is a very special man and very special to me. He was one of my primary mentors here at Youngstown State University. I felt like he took me into his family, Doug. I was in his office as often as I could be. We talked about a lot of things. Jim Tressel always thought well beyond the scope of football, and he cared very deeply about our university, about our community. His children were musicians. Jim tells stories about his own musical life, which I would let him share. That's not flattering to music education, but fortunately he does not hold it against us. Coming back after his time at OSU, he was an administrator at Akron for a brief while, and I watched him blossom there, and to no surprise. When the position opened up that he currently has at YSU, I was thrilled, and frankly was on a stakeholders committee here at the campus that encouraged them strongly to bring him here, and he has done amazing work. I stood next to him about 3 hours ago, Doug, as we were watching the YSU Marching Band play the Icebreaker concert before our home football game this afternoon. So he's somebody who is very special to me and to our city, to our community, to our region. We are very fortunate to have such an effervescent, intelligent, passionate man as our leader, and the affect of that is profound on our campus, on our region. I would guess that he's the most popular person in this part of the United States. I'm pretty sure I'm right about that.
That's quite remarkable. So, because a lot of us, again, as I said, have a lot of exposure to him more through his work on the national level with his work as a coach at Ohio State. But so does he still wear a sweater vest around campus? Is that still a thing?
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay.
That's his. I've seen him with a tie a few times. Jim is, and I mean this with affection. He's always going to be a football coach, Doug. His father was a legend at Baldwin Wallace University. There's a street south of the campus, or on the campus actually, in Berea, named for his dad. He grew up in Mentor. His father was a high school coach. Jim Tressel has depth way beyond most people that I've ever met that have careers like he has. He is a passionate supporter of music and the arts. He talks about the two primary things on this campus or any university in terms of community awareness, being athletics, and music. So that's pretty good for us. And I actually happen to agree with them. Those are things that people are drawn to. They're affected by it. They come to events. They promote all that's good about universities and, frankly, public schools. I think it's true with public schools as well. So having Jim Tressel here has been great for me personally and great for our music school, and very, very much helpful to a university in a part of the world where universities are declining enrollment, and we've hung in there tight. And I suspect it's has a lot to do, what I call it the Jim Tressel effect. When he first came, I used to work out in the gym in the mornings, Doug, and invariably I'd park my car in this lot, and his university car would be near to where I parked, and he was setting his GPS so that he could go to a series of high schools that day to make speeches, stump speeches, if you will, recruiting activities. That's the kind of person that he is, and has benefited us in so very many ways.
Yes, I know, and with his role, especially as an administrator, I know, he's a world famous football coach, but even just his view, because I even know ESPN did some segments about his role as an acting, like just even to think universally amongst a college in regards to even things like fundraising. He has done some pretty remarkable things, and that's really cool to hear about that relationship. That's something you don't hear about much in our profession, so that's really cool. So to now touch a little bit more on to your specific program and some ways you go about in programming music for your ensembles, specifically at Youngstown State. So as far as in regards to repertoire evaluation and selection, what are your views on that in kind of distinguishing what is appropriate repertoire or even what is quality repertoire to bring to our students?
It's interesting because I sometimes I think about these kind of things probably more subconsciously than I do overtly, but knowing that we would be talking about it today, I did some research. I hope you don't mind. And I looked up some things so that I could be more accurate about how I feel about this. If someone says to me, Doug, what's the most important thing you do? There's not a close second. It's that put the right music in the folder for the students. There's a educational theory and approach that's called Great Books, and it was based upon making sure that children read the great literature of the great authors. And I feel similarly about music. What's difficult about band, and since I do both band and orchestra, I have a very direct comparison here. Beethoven didn't really write any music for today's concert band. He wrote some wind music, of course. So we don't have the historical repertoire of what we consider the masters. And so we are now in a period where the wind ensemble is really an unbelievably viable medium for composers. I was at the ABA convention a year or so ago, and they were talking about music, and one of the soloists told our audience, of course, it's a whole bunch of bandmasters, so he was preaching to the choir here. He said that he felt that the best music being written right now for solo instruments and a musical ensemble was music that was being written for solo instruments and wind ensemble. And I would agree. It's a very attractive thing because universities can play music that's difficult. There are university ensembles everywhere that are so superb. In my lifetime, in my career, these 30 odd years of being a university teacher, I marvel, Doug, and the proficiency of university ensembles. Sometimes right out of nowhere, they come up and I'll hear them at our state conference or at CBDNA or Midwest or something, and it's amazing. So I think the wind ensemble is on a roll, if I can be cliche, in terms of being a performance medium. And there's no question that when John Crigliano let loose with his Circus Maximus and encouraged his young composers like Mackey and these amazingly talented men and women to write for what we affectionately call band, that was a marquee moment in the history of music for wind ensemble. Without question, I think the next generation is going to have so much music to choose from. I'm somewhat envious, frankly. But I think it's great.
For sure. And when it comes down to repertoire evaluation, there's a lot of resources out there, even with the Teaching Music Through Performance series. A lot of collegiate directors, when we're in our undergrad, sometimes we'll get a lot of photocopies of, hey, here's this professor's repertoire list if you're going to teach high school or junior high. So as far as even repertoire, if you go out and do honors bands or orchestras at the secondary level or even collegiate level, have you had any favorite resources or repertoire list or the like whenever you go about selecting repertoire, or do you just kind of have a whole gamut of music that you've had experience with in your life and you just kind of make those selections or anything of that sort?
Because I really do believe the number one job I have as a conductor is the music that I choose. I spend an enormous amount of time listening to music. The things that are out there for us now, YouTube, Spotify, all these resources, streaming. I can listen to concerts of my peers across the United States. To be honest with you, Doug, and I don't know that I'm in the majority of people, I never would program or purchase or rent anything that I have not heard. Partly because I'm someone who's very much affected by music on an individual and personal, intrinsic manner. If I'm going to passionately teach it and do my best, I have to feel like it's that important. If I have not had some sort of oral bath in that music, I probably would be less likely to purchase it. Now, that being said, I've been part of commission projects which were intriguing on a different level. And all of them have been incredibly rewarding because the resources that I have are somewhat limited in terms of finances, I'm very careful, and I ask a lot of questions from my peers, and certainly talk to the composers. I'm hoping to be part of a Jim Stevenson project here this coming year with film, which is really exciting to me. He's a great composer, so I'm not worried about it. But I feel I do have some things I'd like to share with you, a list, if I can, give to you of things that I think really differentiate what we sometimes call pretty good or not even good, maybe bad music versus music that is good or great. A lot of school band music, frankly, is formulaic. Some people would justify it on some levels. I happen to think it's not necessarily the most important thing. I'd rather have creative music. So if we have a piece that's formulaic versus something that's creative, where when I experience as a consumer of music, I'm like, oh my goodness, how cool is that? Whatever it is, whether it's the form or the key signatures or orchestration, some music is not it's emotionally superficial. It just doesn't touch at least me. That doesn't mean it doesn't touch anybody, but I would not choose music like that. I would choose music that would change the way that I feel. Because I experienced it, I'm happy or sad. I might cry, I might laugh. I think those are important things. I would never choose anything that's monotonously similar. I would not want to know exactly what's going to come next because I've already heard it. I see that in a lot of literature. I would want something to be different. I would want it to be fresh. I think great music exhibits those things. If it's dull, I wouldn't play it. If it's exciting, I would give it a shot. If it's didactic, that is, again, to some extent formulaic or predictable or scientific, I would rather have something that's dialectic. I don't want to really know exactly what's going to happen as I'm listening. I just went to hear Mahler 5 with my son, who's a wonderful horn player, and I hadn't heard it live in a long time. To sit in the Severance Hall hearing one of the great orchestras in the world play this piece was so electric. I mean, I have goosebumps on bumps right now, Doug, thinking about it. That life-altering experience that you had, that I have, I want my students to have it. And frankly, I want people who come to hear us to feel that way. If it's not connected to some living tradition, classical or popular, it fails to provide our students with a real music education. And I think we who teach music, that our job is to elevate the cognitive and aesthetic awareness of our students. If we don't realize that what we teach, the students are what they eat, they are what they play, we are what we hear, we lessen the value of what we do. And then frankly, Doug, if I can be really honest, and this will be contentious, and I think I can see in your eyes and in your soul that you're someone who wants people to be honest with you. I think that's one of the main reasons why a lot of musicians put band in a 4-letter word category. And I think they're right. We play a lot of bad music with bands. I've never understood that. I didn't play in a really good band until I went to Eastman and Illinois. My undergrad experience wasn't very good. I was an orchestral musician, a jazz musician. I just didn't really know band music. When I first started teaching at Warsaw in 1978, I went to a summer conference and Francis Macbeth was there. And he talked about this for 2 days. And I was like a vacuum cleaner because I had so much to learn. And hearing such a brilliant man who cared very much about band, like it. First of all, he liked band, so that was a good thing. 2, he knew enough about it to take a young teacher who wanted to be good but had no business really starting his career, but he did anyway. It really was a great thing. And I think we sometimes forget that we have 3 big things to deal with here. We have creators, right? If I conduct your music, Doug, then I am your conduit to the ensemble I teach. We have recreators, that's the students, and to some extent the conductor, and we have the consumers. All 3 of those things have to work in concert, and frankly, if there's no value, not artistic, aesthetic value at any level of that, we lose. we lose big time.
To also then talk a little bit about your work in music, teaching both strings and band. A lot of the times, especially this is more pertinent to band directors, but having exposure to the orchestral repertoire, if you will, can be rather limited. Like I can give my personal experience as a saxophone player. Now, in regards to whenever I was in college, a lot of my colleagues on other instruments at least had exposure or had a little bit more interest in the symphony orchestra, and at least that they were eligible to audition for the group one, that they played more frequently, or also that if at least I listened to a lot of music for that type of ensemble, I would hear my instrument played to a high degree. Saxophone, it's hit or miss. Once every 30 tunes, wherever it may be, it might pop up. But in my case, like I really, in my upbringing, especially too, when I was a little kid, I grew up in small, rural central Pennsylvania. So as far as my appreciation for the symphony orchestra, I did have an appreciation, but it only extended to the point where, maybe to where you get in the general music curriculum. So I was familiar with, like all the way from my elementary experience. You have the typical Peter and the Wolf lesson, or up in the way in high school band, you might do a transcription or two of Bolero, or one of those things that are more typical. But I really never knew Mahler. I knew the composer, the picture was on the wall at one point in one of my classrooms, but I really never had the experience with that. Or, even if I, it was a big revelation to me whenever I was in college. Obviously I had played a lot of the Vaughan Williams catalog for band, but I really never looked into his chamber works or even some of the a lot of his orchestral music, and it was just breathtaking once I really started delving into that. So if there were a way for maybe someone who's more band oriented to, or anybody who is not very familiar with the orchestral library, we could say in music that you would teach, or even just some of the great symphonic repertoire to really just learn and appreciate. Would you have any recommendations on ways to go about learning that repertoire? Maybe in a way, I know I'm kind of tangenting a lot, but if you had to say, hey, if you were to learn these 20 pieces right now within the next month, put them on your phone and listen to them. Within the next year, listen to these other 20 pieces, and then maybe, so how do you maybe prioritize some pieces over others to gain that familiarity and just to learn the great breadth of what the orchestral repertoire can bring to us?
Well, I think these pieces have stood the test of time, and that's an attribute in that genre that we don't have in band. These pieces are being written today as we're talking here. People are writing music for band or an ensemble. I think you got to start with the Beethoven symphonies. When someone comes to me and says they want to be a conductor, the first thing I say, there's really inexpensive Dover editions of all the 9 symphonies of Beethoven. On your phone, you can listen to these pieces with the score. And after you've kind of navigated your way through that, come back and we'll talk about some of the other composers. I just think Beethoven, who bridged, of course, classical and romantic music in a way that I don't even know that we all really give it the kudos it deserves. Obviously a unique guy. So I think that's a great way. But there's no question, as we go through the 18th and then the 19th century, the late 19th century music, the romantic pieces, I'm really drawn to the big orchestras. I'm a percussionist like you as a saxophonist. There's not a lot of stuff early in orchestral music aside from timpani. So I find that music to be very intriguing. For me personally, I think a class that I took in Stravinsky in undergrad school with Mario Falcao, a wonderful harpist at Fredonia, changed my life, Doug. It was one of those insightful things, the 3 periods of his life, the ballet music and then the serialism and, of course, the neoclassical era. Those things transcended into Steve Gage, who was going to be a band director. Teaching wind music, and he wrote some fantastic pieces for winds, as we both know. I think you've got to just listen more. My wife probably has given me more things in my life than I ever could give back to her. One of the things she did was she bought a subscription to SiriusXM, and if you were to be in my car and measure the number of times that I put on the symphony channel, it's profound every day. It has expanded my vocabulary, and here I am in my 4th decade of teaching and being a musician. So I think we need to listen a lot more. And there's so many available outstanding recordings of everything, multiple recordings for conductors, teachers. I think access to scores. There's so many cool things now where a new piece for winds will come out with a score on the YouTube. So you literally can watch the score as you listen to it. I use those obsessively, and I've been at this a while. I think we are sometimes victims of not realizing the obvious stuff. The things that are there for us in this generation. I'll never forget David Effron coming and giving a clinic at Youngstown State. He was conducting the Youngstown Symphony Orchestra, and of course I had him at Eastman as a teacher, so I was particularly drawn to him. And he told the students something that made me feel so much better, because I had heard for years that if we listened to recordings as a conductor, we were a lesser musician. And so I never told anyone that I listened ridiculous numbers of times to various recordings as I was learning them. And he told the students that was hogwash, not to listen to multiple recordings of great music as we begin to formulate our interpretation. As long as we're not so affected by those that we don't put our personal stamp on a piece, we're doing good things and not bad. So I just think musicians don't spend enough time listening to music. One of the things I love about breaks, be it summer, winter, fall, whatever, is I listen to music. I've got headphones in my ears. I walk around the neighborhood, in my car, in my office. I probably listen to more music than I do almost anything else in my life. And it's not always pieces that I'm teaching. Certainly it includes that, but it's so that my palate is wet, that I'm hungry, that I consider to some extent the voice of each of these composers, and then even the interpretations of the various conductors, so that when I'm making some artistic decisions in front of an orchestra or a band, whatever, my willingness to do that on some interpretive level is because I've heard things at various junctures that affected my comfort. I don't see that as a regular habit of a lot of people, especially public school teachers who maybe don't have enough time. But maybe we should make the time. I guess. Not sure.
Yeah, for sure. And so it's kind of touch on that with how much you talk about that you listen to music actively just as a listener. In regards to music, not that we're going to conduct or not going to teach, but let's say if your XM subscription were to run out in a month and you only had the chance to listen to 5 more pieces of music. Usually people say if you're on a deserted island, what pieces? But if you had 5 more or 5 pieces of music that you only had the ability to listen to one more time in your lifetime, what would those 5 pieces of music be? Band, orchestral, whatever it may be.
Wow. Mahler 2. Especially the last movement. And it has a lot to do with my artistic interest and my faith. Beethoven 5. The Fateful. I had the privilege of doing that 2 years ago. I'll never forget it. It is that special of a piece. Beethoven 9, for some of the same reasons as Mahler 2 with the choir. And there's nothing like the human voice. There just isn't. As much as I love instrumental music, and if you ever heard me sing, you'll know why I'm in instrumental music. But if I could sing, Doug, I would give it all up to be a singer. So I'm drawn to music that includes singers. That's 3, right? Beethoven 2, 5, and 9, Mahler 2. The Rite of Spring. I remember the first time I heard that piece, I did not like it at all. And because I wasn't ready for it. My intellectual, cognitive awareness of the art of music wasn't ready. But today, I think it's probably one of the great masterpieces ever written by anybody. So we're up to 4. The 5th one? Well, there's a lot of pieces. I might be drawn to something that I've done recently. I did Tchaikovsky 5. in the fall of 2018. And I don't know that I've ever invested more of myself in any piece. For some reason, I find Tchaikovsky to be an intriguing guy because he lived a life of conflict like so many other composers. The second movement of that is so stunningly beautiful. I honestly think I could listen to it every day the rest of my life. So I would have to put Tchaikovsky.
So now to talk a little bit about your work, even outside of your music program, but as a teacher of conducting, in your work throughout the years, teaching people at the undergraduate and graduate levels, but also maybe through adjudications you have done, or even clinics out with teachers more out in the public school realm, because I even know with myself, it's one of those things where we go through our undergraduate curriculum, we get the fundamental meat and potatoes, if you will, of conducting. And we can certainly supplement that with different symposiums or clinics and the like. But even throughout the active busy day, especially for secondary music directors, it can be sometimes hard to attend as many symposiums or clinics as we'd like to refine the craft even more. But from your observances with active school conductors, are there any general things that you've ever seen that you think that could be refined by most conductors to even help their ensembles thrive even more in their music making?
Oh, absolutely. I grew up in a time, Doug, when we didn't have all these graduate degrees in conducting, so I didn't get one. And when we decided in the late 90s that we were going to add a master's degree in conducting here, I was excited at the prospect of being able to offer what I thought was perhaps a more practical degree for especially a school teacher. And in addition to the students that come and are in residence, we also have school teachers. And so in this valley, for instance, there's probably 15 music educators that got conducting degrees. What I didn't see coming was the number of students that I've had in conducting classes, like Chris and Bob Match, some of the people that you've talked to, who ended up going out of here and making huge differences in the profession. And one of the things that I like about that is that there's an interaction between myself and those people. What I see to some extent that I'm not crazy about, this is my own taste, and I'm not necessarily criticizing, but I see what I would call clones, where a student will go to a teacher or a school, and I'll see them conduct, and I see that teacher. Now, I'm not suggesting that we all clone our teachers, right? You cloned your saxophone teacher, I cloned my percussion teachers. But I think that ultimately, we are the music, Doug. And you have a beautiful beard that I'm very jealous of. I couldn't grow it ever. So I'm not going to be the same. I'm not going to look the same as you. I'm not going to feel the same as you. My approach to teaching is to find out what's in your soul, Doug. If you're going to be my student, we got to figure each other out a little bit, and then we're going to kind of delve into this. Now, do the hands matter? Yes, sir. They matter very much because they can get in the way. If we get in the way, that's bad. What we have to do is, to some extent, non-verbally, and perhaps one of the second most effective nonverbal to sign language, which is astonishing to me that we've developed that. Conducting might be the second best way. If I reach my hands out and smile big, there should be some musical effect. So I always try to get my students to think like that, to be the music, to let the music kind of become an internal thing that they then gesturally show. Now, when I watch school teachers, they are often so hung up with notes and rhythms, rhythm accuracy, or time constraints. I'm thinking about all the directors that are still doing marching band shows, contests and things. It would be very unfair for me to be judgmental that they're spending an enormous amount of time in front of a mirror. I do think we have to watch ourselves. By teaching conducting, to be honest with you, I became much more sensitive to what I might look like, and I tended to videotape myself, which I hadn't done as much of. With the video world that exists and the streaming, I have to be pretty careful if I'm going to teach conducting and preach certain things. But I think with my students, I encourage them to become whoever they are. When I watch Chris Ciccone or these people conduct, I marvel because I see them. It's not just the hands and the face and the torso, which are, of course, omnipresent. I think it's important for them to share their thoughts. Now, if I could only give one gift to you, Mr. Conrad, and to every student and musician that I meet for the rest of my life, it would be imagination. And for me, it's not even a close second, because I'm going to assume that you're continuing to grow as a musician and scholar, that you're going to do the research that you need, that you have the pedagogical awareness of the instruments of the children that sit in front of you, that you can do the patterns and you have the wherewithal to learn the time signature changes or whatever it is, tempo changes. But what I can't assume if I don't attempt to unlock that in you is how do you feel? Because you're doing all this research. Now you're up in front of children or young adults or adults, and I conduct professional musicians and student musicians. This coming week, I'm going to Bay High School up by Cleveland. I'm going to work with string players that are in 4th grade all the way up to 12th grade, all in one day. We're going to do a concert that night. Now, let's face it, Doug, I'm not going to do a whole lot of conducting with the 4th graders. We're going to have fun. I'm going to want, when I leave there, I hope they love playing violin or cello more than they did when we started. The more professional conducting I do, the more efficient I have to be. I have to be clear. Nobody wants to play for a conductor who you have to find the beat. And we've all done that. There's some famous conductors who aren't very clear. And I think then somebody in the orchestra band has to do that. I feel like a lot of times when I see school music teachers, let's say band directors, because we're both band directors, I feel like they've developed some habits, like perhaps their ensembles don't play off the beats very well. And that's a pretty omnipresent challenge in Western art music. So they go down, up with their hands, and the faster it goes, the slower it gets. So I see habits. So I guess what I would say to everybody is videotape yourself. If you like what you see, it's probably good. If it's not something that you would want to see if you were holding the saxophone, then probably you should make the adjustments. You talked a little bit ago about going to clinics and workshops. I think that's fantastic. I think it's particularly good if there's interactive learning. I just had a symposium here a couple weeks ago with 4 young conductors, and they shared with each other far more than I shared with them. And I learned more from them by interacting with each other than I could have possibly taught them, because they're so passionate. That's the cool thing about what we do, right? This is a sharing profession, and we're talking about bearing our souls here. If you go and play the Creston Sonata tonight for an audience, what really you want them to do is you want them to leave that hall, number one, thinking, man, that Doug Conrad, he's one heck of a musician. 2, that Creston Sonata, that's an amazing composition. 3, the saxophone is a world-class instrument. And 4, you want them to be better people because they experienced it. And when we do that, most of the time, when our hands help musicians interpret musicianship expectations that we have of ourselves, when we're using our imagination to create beauty, to reach outside the box a little bit. You don't know me very well, but trust me, I am that kind of person. You probably can see that. You never know what's coming next. We just did a mass band concert last Monday night with 104 people, my 52 kids, 52 high school kids side by side. And we took some silence in Julie Giroux's in One Life Beautiful that we hadn't taken in any rehearsal. And between the notes, in the silence, were some of the most beautiful things. And I trusted them, Doug. I was confident enough that the things that I was going to do with my hands and face were going to be clear. I wanted them to know that we could interact together. We were going to make music. My baton doesn't make any sounds I'm particularly proud of. They make the music. And if I can be Julie's conduit in that moment, I think we all win. That's my approach to conducting. So I would give my students imagination.
One of the big things with conducting pedagogy, we'll talk a lot about even specific things with patterns, gestures, even go through exercises like the Elizabeth Green exercises or the like. But one of the things, and this is more pertinent to people that are out in the field working in education, which can have high hours of time involved, amount of hours, sorry, but just, a very busy schedule to when you get home. Sometimes your time outside of just being in the room with kids or administrative duties is very limited, but still it's very crucial to improve in our craft, whether it be through score study or even just practicing conducting. So if you were to offer any advice or approaches to maybe ways, and because this is something I feel that we do not talk about much in pedagogy, is implementing the practice of conducting with a busy, hectic lifestyle, especially that of a secondary music director, So, like, if I were to get home at 5 o'clock, or let's say if you were to get a new job right now at a high school, every day when you got home at 4 o'clock or 5:30, or if marching band practice were later, or even just time to do your score study, what would that look like as far as a regimen, or how you would budget that time to do those kind of things?
Well, I mean, these are realities. Because I've been here for a whole generation, and I have students teaching K-12 music at universities, even a couple professional conductors. I know they don't have a lot of extra time, and hopefully I want them to have a real life too, Doug. I think there's a breadth in a human being who has space in their life for the things that they value, whether it's relationships or nature or sports or whatever. So I think you have to allocate time. Anthony O'Toole was here a few years ago, and he's a young, talented composer. It was fun because he's just getting started, and he said something really profound to me. He said, one of the things that I don't like about doing this, Stephen, is that because I'm here for 2 days, I'm not writing music. He said, my regimen is to write music for 3 to 4 hours a day, minimum. And I'm like, holy cow. If you wrote 4 hours of music every day, you must have tremendous output. He said, it's not things that I necessarily put out for consumption. It's I'm working on my craft. So as I translate that to what you and I do, Doug, I don't think we get close to that. Even Steve Gage doesn't get close to that. I spend more time probably than most people, and I spend a lot more time than my high school band director friends and students, because the administrative responsibilities that they have, even things like buses and lists and gear and food and, oh my goodness, making sure that people are where they're supposed to be, is monumental. I think what we all have to do is delegate better. Sometimes our jobs don't let us do that. If we can, we should delegate, and then we should be selfish. Selfish in the sense that we cannot come into class tomorrow until we have prepared today. Corky Fabrizio was here a few years ago, and he was talking to a group of music educators and our students about score study. And one of the people said, well, Corky, how much time should we devote? He said, before you put a piece of music on the stand for your band, for every minute that is in that composition, you should have 2 hours of your time invested. And he went on to explain why he thought that. And then and they didn't mean to be disrespectful. They said, well, Mr. Fabrizio, you are a 6th grade band director, so you obviously don't have to have 2 hours of your time invested in a 6th grade band piece. He said, you're right, I need 3 hours. What he was talking about was the pedagogical things the kids were going to be dealing with, playing over the break on the clarinet, the physical demand, the flexibility of the brass instruments, or whatever it was that was going to take place for the children to actually execute the music. And that's something that stuck with me, obviously, or I wouldn't be sharing it today. And it affected me as someone who I don't think was spending enough time. And he meant this before they read it, Doug, not to sight read it with the kids, which we can all do. Even I can do that. My kids are good, but they're not that good. So what I've done is I'm a ridiculous score preparer. I'm not somebody who has color schemes. I use whatever pen happens to be next to my chair. My scores are marked. I have every harmonic, language, what instrument's soloing, more information I could possibly share, so that if something arises in a rehearsal that needs attention, I have it there. I don't want to be, let's see, this is a C, G, C, G, E flat, B, a C minor 7. I want to know that it's a C minor 7. I want the students to know that I've already done the homework. If there's mistakes in the score, I should know it. If I've analyzed it sufficiently well, that's really not an F, that's an E flat. I miss sometimes, and sometimes I don't get them all marked, but I think if you were to look at my scores, you'd be surprised by the markings. There's no systemic process that I use. I love the Battisti Garofalo book. I think it's the best book ever for score preparation. The second chapter of that, the score reading, changed my life. To sit in a quiet place and read a score like a novel, with no listening devices, no music being played, just envisioning what we think this is going to be. The walk in the woods that they use in that chapter, the second chapter, is one of my favorite things. I take all of my conducting students through that book because it means that much to me. Of course, E. Green. Where would conducting be without Miss Green? Unfortunately, she was just before me, but Mr. Keene from Illinois was a Elizabeth Green student, and I'm sure most of what he shared with us was from her teachings when he was at Michigan. I think the conducting pedagogy has improved so much in my career, and I only worry if the gestures become the primary thing that we talk about and work on. If score preparation is as or more important, I think, than gestures. Knowledge is never a bad thing, right? We never have too much knowledge. And I think if I'm not getting better, I'm getting worse. So since I graduated 41 years ago, whether I like it or not, from undergrad school, I'm choosing every day to find something new, to learn, whether it's a new piece, a new pedagogical trick. I watch people like crazy. I spent my whole life, I remember being at a NISMA event years ago, and Ed Lisk, who's a pretty famous person in the instrumental music world, took me aside for some reason, thank goodness, and we sat during a festival for 2.5 hours and talked about music education, and he's been my friend and mentor ever since. That's the kind of profession we're in, and when those kind of people share that stuff with us, it makes a big mark on us. And then my obligation is to share. And I'm honest, Doug, with my students. I love them dearly, and I hope they know that. But sometimes some of them have gone astray a little, and I'll go hear their bands or whatever, and not in front of the children, but maybe over a cup of coffee. We'll talk about maybe some things that they might want to think about, because I care so much about music education. I care so much about them. And it's a beautiful symbiotic thing to be a teacher of music, right? We've got these unbelievably blank slates, tabula rasa, if you will, children sitting in front of us, and they want to feed us to feed them. And we have to have a lot to feed them with. Gestures, yes, score preparation. So if getting back to your question, I'm a rambler, as you can see. Getting back to your question, I have to have that information. I'm not able to just pick up a score, Doug, and share a lot about it. I have to do the research. I have to study it, analyze it, think about it, contemplate it, listen to it, read it, analyze it some more, think about it some more, listen to it, then I put it on the stand. So it's big part of my life for sure.
So in a specific circumstance, let's say hypothetically, if Stephen Bryant came out with a new grade 6 piece, it was an outstanding piece like many of his pieces, but it's something you wanted to program for your top wind band at YSU. Before you would hand that music to your students to put in their folders, how long would you spend, or how much time would you spend with the score even before you would have that first rehearsal?
I go back to Corky's thing, no less than 2 hours per minute. I don't think that's unfair. Rehearsal time is precious, right? And I think there's a lot of wasted time when conductors are learning the pieces with the students. So I attempt never to do that. what's nice about being where I am in my life, I've done so many pieces that I can redo them. It's kind of, I'm not saying that I can get lazier. I don't, that word isn't my vocabulary, but I can revisit music. And it's a new experience, but I at least start a little further in the learning curve, and probably my score is already marked. But I think that's a pretty healthy thing, 2 hours for every minute. I really do.
Yeah, cool perspective. So now to talk about another thing that you are well known for anyone that knows any alumnus of YSU, one big thing that they'd say about Dr. Stephen Gage is your ability to connect with people and really being a student-centered educator. So along those lines, how do you go about or approach building and maintaining relationships with students?
Wow, that's really kind. I'm glad that they think that. That's how I have approached my life and career. I feel blessed to be a music educator, Doug. I'm not rich or famous, but I'm happy. And I'm surrounded by people every day, especially young people. I'm kind of a Peter Pan. I like young people. I feed from them. They don't get nearly as much from me as I get from them, both energy and even to some extent artistic things. There's three constituents that I deal with as a college music teacher. Number one are the kids that are here now. They chose this school. I'd like to think maybe I helped them do that in some context, but sometimes not. But once they come, I owe them all of my very best each and every day to teach them. So while they're here, the relationship is built on trust and sharing and experiences, of course. Once they leave, then I think my job continues to be part of their life. I write notes. I love social media, Doug, as you can tell. It's great. It's easy to see my students with their families, but even to just write them a little encouraging note if I know something isn't going well, or congratulating them if something went well. Let them know that I'm thinking about them. I've got 27 years of students here. I have 11 years of public school students, 3 years of Kansas students. That's a lot of kids. I don't even want to think about how many it is. I have 27 years of Youngstown or YSYO alums. That's probably 600-700 students. That's too many to talk to every day, but I remember their names. I have a lot of weaknesses. One is it doesn't happen to be names, and I know where people are from. I know who their teachers were. I care about it. It matters to me. I spend time working on that, and to be there for them. I was over here on my bike right behind me a week ago Friday, and I called 5 grad assistants that are out either in doctoral school or in university teaching positions. I talked to 3 of them, left voicemails for them. And it was just, hey, how's it going? I'm sitting here today, I'm sweating on this bike, but I'm really trying not to think about that. I'm trying to think about how you might be doing, or is there anything I can do to help you? I can't wait to see you at the Midwest, and we'll sit and have some Giordano's pizza, and we'll talk about life or whatever you want to talk about. I tell my students that I have, my graduate conducting students, that they're going to get a lot more from Steve Gage if they hang around. I'll buy them lunch. They don't have any money. I have plenty. So I'll buy them a coffee, or we'll walk across the street, or we'll talk about life. I want to know that they realize that they can count on me. If and when they need me, I'm there for them. I love them. I tell my students that I love them. This is an era where we're all supposed to be careful about what we say, and I'm careful and respectful, but it's true. It's not pretend for me. I became a teacher because my teachers were amazing, and the ones that weren't amazing also have driven my desire to be a better teacher. I'm so proud of them, Doug. I'm way, way over the things that I've been able to do in my life and career astound me. So I'm at the point where I want to be a happy and proud father of my children and a happy and proud teacher of my students.
So to kind of build on that a little bit, and this is actually a question I actually got an idea from Eric Plum, who's another student. But anyway, so
Eric,
hey Eric, so if you're listening, hey Eric. So with that said then, do you see yourself foremost as a music educator or a human educator?
When Stephanie and I sent our children to school, they had already learned how to read. My wife is an amazing mom. She's a great teacher and musician herself. We sent the kids to school to learn how to function and to learn to take orders and to be part of the team and meet deadlines, task completion. We didn't expect their teachers to teach them everything they needed to know. Now, truthfully, as they went along school, they went and took some classes in mathematics and science, which were way above my pay grade. I was grateful for the skills that their teachers had. I think in our profession, it's such a balance. If we don't understand that by being a music teacher, we are attempting to either unlock or reopen the musical souls of our students. They have to fall in love with music. They have to be hungry to learn. So there has to be some music education that takes place. But I don't know how you do that if they don't trust you. And I think we live in a cautious time where young people are so bombarded by social media and technology that the human things can be lost. So when one gets a little older, Doug, and what was once brown hair becomes gray, like it has on me, anecdotes become part of my daily thing. And I suspect Eric would have shared some of those even from 20 or some odd years ago. What a wonderful musician, Eric, and what a great person he is. What a great career, what a pleasantly eccentric and brilliant, talented musician. I remember him student teaching. I remember all that. And so I think about that as a primary role too. I don't know how, except to say blended. I wouldn't feel good about myself if I only was a human being teacher, but I wouldn't feel good about myself if I only shared theory, history, and pedagogy, and even interpretation. And I don't know that how I could be a successful, if I am, music educator, if I didn't open up the musical soul of the people that sit in front of me so they're not afraid to express themselves. You know, we can't pretend what we do is similar to anything else. I've never met a human being who doesn't like music, not one. They don't all like the same kind of music that you and I like, but they like music. There's something so basic about this. What we have to do is find what it is that they already like and expand it. And that's not just true of people who aren't in music school or aren't in musical ensembles. It's true of people, period. Our concerts should be these buffets for our audience to taste some things. And I even am at the point in my life, Doug, where sometimes after we play a piece, I'll ask an audience how they like something that was a little different. We did Mavericks by Paul Dooley last year, and I want to tell you, that thing is so hard, so extraordinarily well written, especially for a percussionist like me. I was in seventh heaven for the 4 or 5 weeks. But it's one of those pieces that I could see my mother, who's not with us anymore, not liking very much without some sort of introduction or comfort or experience. I think to think that we can teach music without creating a relationship with the people that we teach and understanding that when we do that and we're recreating the music for a consumer, that is part of it too, the human part, would be a terrible error in judgment. I don't see how we do one without the other, I guess. So I copped out a little bit. It didn't really gravitate to one or the other.
Certainly. And I know you had mentioned some specific ways that you've maintained or have had relationships with students, even at the collegiate level, where you might be able to go get coffee after rehearsal with your grad students or say hey to somebody through social media. But let's say if you were in the context of, like, let's say if you came and took my job, where sometimes the only times you might have interactions with that clarinet player student of yours might be just third period every day, or even sometimes every other day, depending on scheduling. If I were to go see if you were maybe to switch jobs with someone like me or someone like, say, Todd or anyone like that,
right.
If I were to go observe your rehearsal, what would I see, or how would you go about ways to let students know that you cared about them as people, or what would I observe in that relationship building process throughout the rehearsal?
One of the things I was reminded of the last couple of days is to be a little bit introspective about how I teach, Doug, because you're a wonderful interviewer, and you're very thoughtful, and you're insightful, and you do your job. You make us really consider how and why we do things. And I realize that I am a dialectic teacher. I'm a Socratic oriented person. I'm not the most structured person in the world. I married this wonderful lady who keeps me on task, and I have to be structured sufficiently so that I don't fail her or my children or my students or my employers. But in the classroom, it's inclusive. I let the students make decisions, artistic decisions. I openly talk to them about realistic tempos. I want them to think about what's like. I use the section leaders primarily, but so I'll ask questions. And if I'm doing an honor group, I always ask the host to put names up, and I'll search around, and in the third clarinets in the middle, I'll ask Susie Doe a very specific question. And what I suspect happens, I'm hoping, is that everybody in the room's like, oh my goodness, that could be me. And then invariably what happens, there becomes these kind of dialogues. They're brief. You're right. If I was you and I had to run from class to class to class for the entire time that I'm in school, and there are high school kids with all sorts of other duties besides just being in band, I might not. Maybe at a football game, I'd have a chance to pull them aside and ask them how it's going. That's something that we get to do that a lot of people don't get to do. But in general, you're right. I think we also have the luxury, often in music, of knowing children over a longer period of time. If I taught economics in 11th grade, maybe one semester, we don't have that. In most school systems, we know the kids basically from when they start until they graduate, and even beyond. So I think we have to want to get to know them. I don't know that I can be a very good teacher if I don't feel like I know anything about you. Not that I would tailor make any group lesson specifically for you, but I would take it into consideration. And I realize that everybody that sits in that room is different, and that a single approach to anything is not going to be all-encompassing. I'm going to have people who want a much more rigorous lesson plan. I'm the guy that when my first building principal asked me for a lesson plan, I said, well, Mr. Kaminsky, I could draw one up, but I really don't know what's going to happen today. So what I started to do, this is terrible to admit, I would make 4 or 5 lesson plans, Doug, and I would just, in those days, we thorough-faxed them, and I would just turn them in, and I think he just decided to give up asking me, because I really didn't know. Now, I suspect he had other music teachers that were very specific. I have grad students who come into rehearsals with lesson plans that are so detail specific that I feel guilty myself. But it's not that I don't think about it. It's just I'm not sure what's going to happen. Any more than I know that George is going to be in a good place to do what he's supposed to do today. And if he doesn't, for some reason, and I look in his eyes and I see anguish, maybe something didn't go well, to beat on him today would be the worst thing I could do. If I don't know him at all, how he might react under pressure, I don't think I can be a good teacher. I have to know them. So I just make it work. I think public school teachers are in a rough spot because there's a movement away from social media contacts with students, and I kind of get it. There's some awful things that happen. For me personally, it's vital. I love the fact that I can write a text to somebody and ask them how it's going, or say, congratulations, I heard that you won this concerto audition, or that you were asked to go speak at some conference by your applied teacher, or you won a essay contest and you get to go to Project Quest. I make sure I do that. I don't think there's enough praise given to our students. I think we're all pretty good at finding the things they don't do well. Sometimes we forget that it's nice to say, hey, that was real. Like, you're a good interviewer, Doug. All right. I loved your podcast very much. And I was excited to be part of this. And you should be proud of it. So I think we don't always extend ourselves for whatever reasons. And I suppose there can be a consequence to it. And I suspect there could be for me at some point. I hope not. Because anybody who knows me knows this is all about caring about people. And at some juncture, then, maybe I'll let younger people go do it. But in the meantime, my friend, look out, here I come. I love teaching music. And children motivate me beyond belief. I want to know who they are.
For sure. And I really enjoyed how you were talking about even it's kind of along those lines where I'm not even able to teach them until I know them. It's kind of, we had a previous guest on, Scott Rush, who many people know, but he talked about that famous quote, they don't care until, how much you know until they know how much you care. So, yeah, really good point. So now to kind of delve in a little bit more to your specific teaching, if you were to describe one or two of your favorite rehearsal tactics, what would those be?
This might surprise you, as verbal as I am. I love the monk rehearsal. I find that young people, and this is not new to 2019, but when they come to music class, even at the university, so this will make you feel a little better, a lot of the things they've already done that day didn't give them any space whatsoever. It was sit in a chair, take notes, very didactic theory class, or a very didactic history class, or pedagogy class, or whatever, maybe outside our building, education class or something. So finally, they're in the room with their trumpet. They're sitting in their chair. Their buddies are sitting around them. They're going to play something they're looking forward to. They tend to be somewhat gregarious. So sometimes it gets out of hand. And I have chosen to let the air out of the balloon. I used to try to be that autocratic dude. I'm just not wired for it. So what I've done is we lay some ground rules about when and they can and cannot speak. But even then, I must admit, in the learning curve, sometimes it gets a little out of control. So what I do is I go into the room and I write some things on the board that I can point to so that I don't have to say one word. We have a tuning process that's etched in stone. It's simple. And once that's completed, then I'll point to the piece. I'll maybe tap my head for the top of the tune and off we go. Not a word is spoken for 20, sometimes 40, 50 minutes. There's no question that they are the most productive rehearsals. I can't do it every day because it would get old and boring. I can't do it until they can really play something because, let's face it, if we have to fix it, it's pretty hard to explain that. But there's not even a close second to that rehearsal. Not one word is spoken. I would even love to maybe come in there maybe this week with Halloween with tape over the top of my mouth so they would know I wouldn't say anything to them. I think the best advice ever given to me was by this wonderful guy at Emporia State, Joe Shirk, who passed away way too soon. And we had a very good assessment of my teaching for that year 2 of my 3 there. And we got all through all the stuff he had to do. And he said, there's just one more thing, Steve, that I'd like to share with you. And I said, what's that, Joe? He said, well, when I bring my oboe into rehearsal, what do I want to do? And I thought about it for a minute. You want to play it? He goes, yes. He smiled, he patted me on the back, and I walked out. I realized what he was saying is, shut up, Gage. I'm bringing my oboe in there to play it. And that has been something that I've really thought about. Because I am a verbal person. There's no doubt about it. You're hearing it today. But in that room, I think they want to make music. So I think the monk rehearsal is clearly verbal.
So now on to the next question. This is a little bit more philosophical, but this can be about the importance of music in the aesthetic role in everyone's life, not just in the act of music making in a band room per se. But if I were to ask you, why do we teach music in public schools? What would you say?
I'm like everyone else. Every once in a while, I look at the society that we live in, and I read and hear things about how important technology and how the jobs pay better There's no jobs for musicians. You look at on any resource and you see the careers that they tell you not to get degrees in. The performing arts are always on those lists. It's somewhat demoralizing. But then I come back to, why did I become a musician? There was this lady in Perry Elementary School, Eleanor Torrey, who I owe so much to. And we used to march and sing in elementary school. I'm not a good singer, but she taught me to love music. Music is a key part of being human. I think, isn't it the minor third that we sing right away? As soon as we can orate at all, it's something that makes human beings different than any other creature on the planet. We make music. I'm not saying birds sing and all that, but there's a cognitive connection to being able to recreate music. And even to consume it and have it affect us emotionally on many levels. I think about parts of The Rite of Spring we talked about. That makes me anxious. Parts of Mahler 5 made me anxious. Part of it made me cry. All in one piece. We have to have that. And what I'm afraid we have not done, that's somewhat a criticism of our profession and a challenge as I get to this level of my life, I sometimes think we forget, why are we really here? Is it to make sure that the YSU Wind Ensemble plays the best concert it's played in a long time? Of course. Without that drive, it's not going to be very good. But what we really want is for all the people in the group and all the people who hear it to be affected by it. If I'm teaching second grade classroom music, we want literacy. We want them to sing. We want to know a little bit about theory. We want to know that by being kinesthetic, by moving a little bit, maybe we can do this together. Maybe we can even address intonation at a young level, which is an omnipresent challenge, of course. I think sometimes but those things become so much important to us, we forget what really matters. Why do we really need music in the schools? We need music in the schools because the people who go to school need to be better human beings. They already have a predilection to music. And if by being in music and exposed to music, their soul is expanded to the point where they can't spend any aspect of their life without music, we win. We win exponentially. And we've done a poor job because we don't have the same kind of support for music education we do other things. I go to the stadium today, I look around, my goodness, there are millions of dollars, Doug, of facility things, an empty stadium on a rainy day because the team hasn't doing well. But I look at our music school and we have so many things that we need. And that's in a university that cares about its music school. I go to high schools or middle schools and I see instruments that are taped together, rehearsal rooms that are not conducive to recreation of music on any high level. So we still need to do better at marketing. We tend to be exclusive. We start fourth graders, but do we give every kid a chance to be in the band? No, we don't do that. We look for physical. We go to the general music teachers and we ask, who are the best kids? Those are the ones we want to start. I'm not suggesting that's a terrible thing, but do we give the rest of the kids an opportunity? I don't know. Maybe we have always, whether we knew it or not, or maybe it was a conscious thing for some, been elitist about this. Like only certain people can do this if you're totally committed. I don't think so. Because I think if we were in the cars of people that are driving and they're listening to the radio, I bet most of them are singing along. So they like music. They don't necessarily like it the way Doug Conrad and Steve Gage like it. Maybe even not the same thing. And if we gave them a chance, Doug, could we get them to come around a little bit? I'd like to think so. So that's my whole job. I think that's what I do every day. Honestly, I do that a lot more. I want them to be insatiably in love with music so that as a performer, they take care of everything they need to take care of. Practicing it, slowing it down, listening to it, practicing it some more, slowing it down, listening to it some more. So that tomorrow when they come in the room, there's no question that they can recreate music. That's my mantra, Doug. Love music. I mean, I use that heart music every day on everything that I write. I want people, because I think when you love music, you love each other. You care enough about people. You understand that it's okay to be emotional. I can cry at the drop of a hat, Doug. I went to a concert Wednesday night of a young man, Anthony Taddeo, has this jazz combo. He took Italian songs of historically of his family, and he has this combo. Now, my son happens to be in it, but even if he wasn't, these 6 guys that recreated, he wrote this suite of music. And I mean, the emotions that were in there. There were children that had been recorded, little kids singing Italian songs. And there was one movement of a lady moaning the loss of her husband at a funeral with this music over the top of it. And I thought, my goodness, are you kidding? I mean, this is so vivid. It's so human that anybody that's in this room experienced this will never, ever forget it. And if that's true, I'm affected by that Cleveland Orchestra performance of Mahler 5. I'll never forget it, Doug, ever. That's what we get to do. How cool is that? You know, and I don't think we take advantage of those things sufficiently well. I don't.
That's a great
I don't
answer.
know why.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Steve. So to now move on to our next question. If you were to go over some of the major influential leaders you've had in your life, professionally or even personally, who would those leaders be, and what have you taken away from your time with them?
Well, I've had 4 percussion teachers. Ted Frazier of Fredonia, who he was autocrat. Not always easy to like, hard to love. As I've gotten older, I've appreciated more. He was a taskmaster, and I needed it. I was a young farm kid who thought he was pretty good, and I wasn't very good at all. When I went to Eastman, Mr. Beck was my teacher. Mr. Beck taught me to love music, to respect music, and to work hard, because the ultimate goal wasn't necessarily to learn to play the etude, the sonata, or the concerto. It was to invest in it for long-term reasons. My teachers at Illinois, Fred Fairchild, Tom Simon, took a man. I was in my 30s. I'd been out. I hadn't been playing very much, and made me fall back in love with playing. My conducting teachers, Harry John Brown at Fredonia, was a magnificent musician. Don Hunsberger and Roy Ernst at Eastman. Gary Smith and Jim Keene and Paul Vermel, who was the orchestra director there. Bob Reynolds and I spent a lifetime one day in Ann Arbor on Mozart Grand Partita. I told him at the end of the day, I said, I only made one mistake in my life, Bob. We're eating food in one of his favorite restaurants. And he goes, what's that, Steve? And I said, I didn't come visit you when I was looking for schools. He said, it's okay. You can say I'm your teacher. So I'm going to say Bob Reynolds. I had Dave Effron, both at Eastman, and I had him here as the symphony. Because I do the youth symphony, I get to work with these people. Isaiah Jackson conducted here. Randy Fleischer's here now. Jim South and Joe Shirk at Emporia State, tremendous influence. But probably my primary mentor as a music teacher was a guy by the name of Norman Beamish, who was the director of music at Auburn, who hired this young wannabe music teacher who didn't know anything but wanted to be the band director at Auburn High School, took him into his family. He just passed away not too long ago. We spent so much. Doug, he sat in every high school wind ensemble I conducted at Auburn for 9 years. I had a mentor, friend, colleague, sitting in those rehearsals every day. The first 5 years, especially, we would go to eat lunch after rehearsal, and he, after we started getting our stuff off the trays, he'd say, Steve, did you hear the saxophones at letter D? My stomach started to hurt because I didn't hear them. And it would be this like every day, pound. He would record us before we went to evaluation. He would do a sheet on the band like a week before, and he would write down everything he heard that didn't sound good, and he'd post it up on the board with like a C on it. But I mean, it was tough love. Norm was the old school. His teacher was Herbert Harp, who was both a conductor and a trumpet teacher in upstate New York. He played in the North Tonawanda Legion Band, which was one of the nation's finest bands in that 60s and 70s, Doug, when it was about getting it right. Everybody worked hard. Nobody felt sorry for themselves. Norm Beamish never felt sorry for himself or anybody else. He expected us to be taskmasters. I loved him so much. He was a father figure to me. And so if I had to pick just one person, it's clearly Norm Beamish. But I don't think my students realize how important they are to me. You've interviewed some of them. I'm so admiring of what they have done and continue to do as not only as musicians and conductors, but as human beings. I'm touched by their humanity. I'm touched by their loyalty to this little school up here in Northeast Ohio. We're so blessed. We just celebrated our 150th anniversary, Doug, of granting degrees in music. Sixth oldest music school in the United States. It was founded at the end of the Civil Wars because the soldiers needed a place to go to school to become formally trained to enter the workforce. It put people in all the bands, the Fillmore Band, the Sousa bands, and of course teachers. It's continued to do that for a century and a half. I feel honored to be part of that tradition, and I don't take it lightly. I value my colleagues, extraordinary scholars, artists, players, teachers, and our students who lay it on the line on their game day kids. This is an area where people work hard. They don't feel sorry for themselves. They don't have silver spoons in their mouths, and so when we ask them to do something, they do it. Sometimes begrudgingly, I suspect. Behind the scenes, comments are made from time to time, but they know it's done for the right reasons, and they have never, ever disappointed me. Not once in 27 years. Not once, Doug. That's amazing, I think. So if you ask me that question, who are my heroes or it's all those people I mentioned, and it includes my students. It includes them.
That's quite the list. So now, to move on to our last question here of the interview, and I'll keep this a little open, but if you were to offer advice to any music educator, whether it be a kindergarten music teacher or even a high school orchestral director or a band director, what advice would that be to help their students thrive?
I think what I see that makes me sad, I'm at the point now where I get asked to go speak to groups of teachers. And I'll look around the room at people who range in age from maybe 25 or even maybe a little younger to 65. And I'm closer to that, whether I like it or not. And so I kind of look to see, well, I'm only in here because I have to get these hours, to get my relicense, or, oh my goodness, Steve, I'm struggling. Can you please say a couple pearls of wisdom that I can take back to the classroom? And all of that together, it's a monumental task. And oftentimes I'm not a lot of answers, but I care a lot. What I would say to them is simply this. Are you continuing to grow as a musician? Are you still singing or playing? I had the honor of playing the percussion 5 part last Monday night for one of my amazing graduate students, Ryan Dutton, just conducted Asphalt Cocktail. Very difficult piece. He needed an extra percussionist, and I said, I'll do it. And, to some extent, it wasn't really the right time, but I made the time, and I learned it, and I worked hard. I went to the sectionals. I sat in rehearsals. It was neat to be back there with the guys. It reminded me of my youth. Are you still making music? Singing in your church choir? Are you playing in the community bands? Are you in the regional orchestra? I do think a baton can be an instrument, and I've spent most of my life doing that. But I do think, especially when you're maybe the first 20 years or so, you need to continue to sing and play. You talked about some people that we know. Bob Matchett's a top call trombone player. That level of musician who stands in front of a wind ensemble, a marching band, or a jazz ensemble, oh my goodness, that's pretty profound. I think you need to know what it is that's state of the art. It's so easy to become complacent. When was the last time that you went to hear the Cleveland Orchestra? When was the last time you heard the Marine Band? When was the last time that you listened to the Mormon Tabernacle Choir on YouTube? When was the last time you drove to one of those cities? When was the last time that you went to the opera? When was the last time you went to a state-of-the-art musical? To sit in a room with people who are singing and playing at such an extraordinary level that you are reminded why you became a musician in the first place. I think the day-to-day doldrums of being a school teacher would get to anybody. And I became a university teacher for a lot of reasons, but I will tell you the primary one is I started to lose my edge. I didn't know why I was doing this anymore. We had so many doggone trophies in the cabinets, and everybody thought it was great except me. I'm like, where's the beef here? I needed to go back to school so I could figure this out again. And I was already in my early 30s. I think you have to stretch your boundaries. It's so easy to recycle pieces. And I mentioned to you earlier that I do that. But what about a new tune? What about something completely different? Why not try something new? And if it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world. If you do it with the children and they know that you have their best interests in heart, they'll live with it no matter what the outcome is. Stretch your boundaries. Go to master classes. You talked about going to conducting symposia. What a cool thing to do. Everybody should do that, including me. I think we tend to hibernate a little. We get comfortable and or we get discouraged. I was with some teachers today in the school districts that they're teaching in, have done some really what I'm going to call dumb things with scheduling and really prohibitive in terms of those teachers being able to be the artists and educators that they're capable of being. You do that long enough, you can kind of close down, right? You can remove yourself from growing and just survive. I used to hate when I would hear band directors say how many more football games they have. That's not something they should say around me. If that's really how you feel, then let somebody else do the football band that's out there doing it because they want the kids to have a great experience. That sounds judgmental, but I feel that way, Doug. And, I am somebody who has loved teaching music every day since 1978. If I hadn't enjoyed student teaching, I was going to go to law school. But I remember meeting Rosella Morgano on the first day of my student teaching, this short, fantastic, beautiful human being who loved those kids in the Lake Shore School District so much. And I thought, if I could be half the teacher or half the person that this lady is, I'm going to be okay. And I've never stopped. I got on that train on that day, Mr. Conrad, and 41 years later, I'm still there. I think we sometimes forget why we became a musician. We forget why we became a music educator. We forget the little things that we do. Maybe the concert doesn't sound like the Marine Band, but maybe for those children, it's the most profound thing that ever happened. And maybe the kids, had such a great experience. We know darn well, and we don't think about this. What really matters in live performance isn't how it sounds. How does it feel? How does it feel to play One Life Beautiful by Julie Giroux? What happened to you during the course of this composition and this performance that affect the way you are as a human being, as a musician? And if it's good, then we win. And so I guess I'm going to say you're going to have to seek out something to grow. If you hate your job that much, if you do, and you're in a position where you have to do it for financial reasons, then find something new to do in the midst of it. I can't fathom a factory approach to life. I'm not wired for that. And I think most musicians aren't. And sometimes I think we run into people who have kind of gravitated in that direction and they can't be happy about it. So I guess I would say to them, you want your students to thrive, right? You doggone better be inspiring. If you're not inspiring and you don't provide opportunities that are creative and stretch them, they won't thrive. It starts with the teacher. We can talk about all sorts of other things, but I've been at this a little while, my friend, and it's about the teacher. So I guess I hope that's answers your question.
Yeah, certainly a lot of great advice, especially about with the inspiration we can bring to kids. That's a really great benefit, and refresher always to remind ourselves with too. I know sometimes just even with the ins and outs of the school day, it can be taxing a while, and just to remember that it begins and ends with you is certainly a big point to remember. And with that said, Dr. Gage, I'd like to thank you again, and I wish you and your students nothing but the best with the remainder of your school year.
Thank you, sir. Doug, you're doing a wonderful service for the profession, and I'm glad that you allowed me the privilege of being part of your journey.
This concludes our episode. Many thanks to Dr. Stephen Gage for sharing his time, wisdom, and insight on what it takes to spark imagination for our students through the idiom of music making. If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to check out our show accounts on social media, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, or even Instagram. We are also on Spotify, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and Google Play Music for you to subscribe and stay updated on all future episodes. This is Doug Conrad saying thank you for listening, and be sure to tune in to the next edition of Director's Circle.